What's up, micro people out there? How are we doing? How are we doing on this fine Tuesday morning? Hey, no attendance in the chat. Today's attendance is this. Today's attendance, we're not gonna do attendance in the chat anymore. It's gotta be cool. We're gonna make it fun. Today's attendance in the chat is your favorite pizza topping. Your favorite pizza topping. What's your favorite pizza topping? And if you say no pizza, you're marked absent. What's up, Taha? Stop writing attendance. Favorite pizza topping in the chat. That's your attendance for today. But I'm glad to see all you guys here. I got all 19 of us here, which is really sweet. Bacon, says Tyler. Pepperoni. Fresh mushrooms. Not only mushrooms, but fresh too. I've never been a big mushroom person, but I should try that out. Pepperoni. A second pizza on top of the pizza. Pepperoni, bacon, cheese, pepperoni, sausage, pepperoni. I like sausage for sure. Mine's tough. It's between three things: jalapeno, bacon, and feta cheese. Feta cheese is very underrated on a pizza. I like doing like feta cheese, spinach, and tomato sometimes. But sometimes I'll get like jalapeno bacon sausage, right? Kind of like 180. But anyways, thank you guys for being here. Today's lesson I feel like is kind of fun. And it's relatively short as well, all right? As a matter of fact, I only have like, I think 4 slides in total for you guys. 4 slides in total, so please be dialed in, because the thing that we learned about today, it's like easy if you pay attention, but if you're not paying attention, you're not all here, right? You have distractions around you. It's going to be really tough to learn it yourself, right? Or to maybe relearn it, like on the problem set or something like that, right? It's going to be kind of tough. So, like, there's not a lot of YouTube videos for this. I don't even think Clifford like really covers this, or if he even has a YouTube video for it. Maybe he has like a minute 30-second video for this. But by the way, Clifford, I'm coming for you. The YouTube channel's growing. Look at us. I think today's going to be pretty fun. It's a little bit different than what we've been looking at. We're going to look at a supply and demand product market, but today we are concerned about trade, right, and limiting trade. And you've heard it in the news the last few years, right? You know, trade wars, right? You know, having tariffs with China or wherever, right? Or like having, you know, full trade restrictions and not trading with other countries, or having free trade agreements, and why do countries try to have free trade agreements and things like that. So it's almost a little bit macro, but it's micro because we're looking at the implications of trade on the product market, right? On like the market for like steel, or like the market for like automobiles or something like that, right? So I think today's gonna be pretty fun, I must say. Other news is make sure you turn in problem set 2.4 tonight. Don't forget problem set 2.4, and also if you're trying to be a guru, right? Which I hope you guys all are trying to become a guru. Make sure you glance over those modules, all right? I can't remember the module on the top of my head. When we get to micro, it's like module 47. It's like really high numbers because it's macro, the first part of the book, and then micro, the second part of the book. Make sure you're reading modules, right? If you have a spare 20 minutes, like it's going to help you so much. It's worth the 20 minutes reading the module, because you're going to save hours studying and hours, you know, looking back at the PowerPoint, like I don't understand, and hours redoing your problem sets and things like that. Make sure you look at the modules. It's a big deal. Okay. Whoa. Who's that on the screen up there? Who is that? That's crazy. Hope you guys have your coffee today, because I am ready. I'm ready. All right. So the PowerPoint, the lecture won't take that long. Okay. And then we'll chill out on Google Meet. We'll probably chill on Google Meet up until 2 o'clock. Right. I want to see you guys in the Google Meet, and then I'll work with students that need a little bit more help afterwards. Right. So be here until 2 o'clock. You have to every day. You have to be here until 2 o'clock. If you leave early, I got to mark you absent. Oh no, did he freeze for anyone else? I look good on my secondary monitor. Jenna, refresh. Refresh. Uh-oh. I don't know. All right, anyway. Trade and taxes, right? So today we're going to talk about trade. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about taxes. And taxes is also going to carry on until Thursday. And then we're going to re-employ our knowledge of elasticity, okay? Trade. All we're focused on today is trade, okay? Today's learning objective. I'm back, rip. Okay, anyway, it says, I can analyze what happens to a product market when there is no trade, free trade, and limits to trade, okay? So there's 3 different scenarios we're going to explore today. What does the product market look like when countries freely trade with one another, right? Like U.S. trades with Mexico. There's no trade barriers, no trade restrictions. Second scenario is free trade, right? Barriers, you can't trade. That's option 1. 2, freely trade. There's no restrictions whatsoever. And then number 3 is there's some barriers, right? There's tariffs. Or more so it's going to be focused on tariffs, okay? All about trade. Cool. All right. This is your vocab slide, and then we're going to get into the graph. And you got to be paying attention to it. You might want to have a notebook and kind of draw stuff with me. I would say here in a second. All right, so some vocab words that we're gonna have to use in a second. It says world price. What does world price mean, right? Like if I'm looking at a supply and demand product market and it says PW or world price, what does that mean? That would be the price that the good would be priced at if there was free trade allowed. There was no restrictions to trade. Okay? World price would be the price of the good if all countries could compete in that market, like the steel market, right? Like if people wanted to, they could buy steel from Guatemala or wherever, right? That's the idea of world price. Here's a big concept. If the world price for bananas is cheaper than the domestic price in the U.S. for bananas, what are Americans going to do? Right? If the world price for bananas is cheaper than the domestic price for bananas, what are Americans going to do? They're going to import bananas. I guess a better way to think about it is like a t-shirt, right? Like a lot of us buy t-shirts from China. Why do we buy t-shirts from China? Because they're cheaper than American-made t-shirts generally, right? Generally things are all American-made, U.S.-made generally are higher price. Generally consumers want to find those lower prices, and if the lower prices is elsewhere in the world, we're going to import that good. And what I mean by import the good, I mean you are going to buy it online and it's coming from another country, so it's going to import, right? It's going to enter into our border, and that's going to happen when the world price is less than the domestic price. If the domestic price is less than the world price, right? The price of bananas is cheaper in the U.S. and there's no other place in the world that has bananas at a lower price, Americans are going to export bananas, right? Because people are going to want to buy our bananas rather than their own. And we're not going to want to buy their bananas. We're going to want to buy our own. So we're going to, as a country, export bananas, right? Domestic price and world price. Hope you guys know what the word domestic means, right? Domestic means within our borders, like a domestic cat in your house, domesticated cat, something like that. Tariff. Okay, what's a tariff? You learned about tariffs in macro, right? You had to. A tariff again is a tax on an imported good. When the good comes overseas, it's going to be taxed per unit, right? So if someone buys 10 bananas from, I don't know, Bolivia, maybe they have bananas, when each banana enters into our shore, each individual banana is going to be taxed, right? Say $1 or $2 or $3, right? Or more. So generally, if the world price for banana is $4 and we have a tariff of $1, that means you're going to pay $5 for your banana, right? I'm pretty sure we're taxing avocados from Mexico for whatever reason, political probably. And yeah, if the price for an avocado to buy from Mexico is $3 and we have a $1 tariff on avocados, that avocado when it enters into the U.S. and it goes on the shelf is probably going to cost you $4, right? Generally, consumers pay for the tariff, is the idea. Last vocab word I want to think is quota, all right? A quota is more so called an import quota. Basically, that means the country is going to set a max number of a certain good that can enter into the country in a given year, right? So say we have an import quota with Brazil, and we're going to only import 500 tons of sugar from Brazil, right? So if any other, once that quota is met, right, any sugar that enters into the U.S. afterwards will not be able to enter the U.S., right, because the quota is met. A quota and a tariff are going to have the same sort of goal, right? What's the goal of a tariff? What's the goal of a quota? Is to protect domestic producers, okay? The whole idea of a tariff is, say I am a pepper farmer, right? And my peppers cost $5 per pepper, and someone in Chile is making peppers for $1, right? I can't compete with them. So what I do is I call a senator or a representative, and I'm like, hey, I will give you money for your campaign if you slap a tariff on pepper farmers from Chile, right? That way I can sell my peppers, because no one wants to buy them. Mine are too expensive. And then what happens is peppers are taxed from Chile when they enter the border to help me, right? The domestic producer is the idea. The whole point of limiting trade is to protect domestic producers at the expense of domestic consumers, okay? The big thing I want you guys to think about, though, is not all businesses all businesses are producers, but they don't have to be just a producer. A lot of businesses are consumers, right? A maximum limit, a max, right? Like an import quota, like a quota. Once the quota is met, nothing else is allowed to come in. Like think about like Ford, for instance. Ford is just not a producer of automobiles. Ford is a consumer of steel. Ford is a consumer of glass and plastic and rubber, right? So if we tax steel, we tax rubber, we tax, materials like that, it's not going to help the producer Ford, because in this case, Ford is a consumer. It's going to hurt Ford in this case. So like remember that, right? A lot of the tariffs we have now are like, protect steel workers. Well, it comes at the expense of Ford workers, right? Because now Ford has to pay a higher price for steel. They're going to have less money left over to pay laborers, right? And they're obviously going to produce less and higher prices, and that's going to affect me and you, right? The direct consumer at the end of the line, okay? So yeah, the whole purpose of a tariff or quota is to protect domestic producers from a cheaper world price. That's the idea. Okay? Pretty simple. All right. So people, I have 3 graphs. It's going to be a continuation each graph. And obviously it would be to protect domestic unemployment, right? Again, if I actually had people working for me on my chili farm, right, my pepper farm, and I can't compete with the foreign producer, right, I'm probably going to have to lay off workers. So that's kind of the general idea. So is to protect domestic producers and those workers that work for those producers, right? Okay. So here's a graph, and like I said, we're going to run through three different scenarios, and I'm going to change the slide 3 different times. Okay, so you kind of just got to follow me here. If anyone's taking notes, I'll give you time to do so. I don't really know how you would write this in your book. In a classroom setting, I print off the slide and I give you it, and you guys color it in. So it's going to work kind of differently today, but I guess if I go too fast, you can just rewatch the video. Right? Okay. So, what we have here, let's kind of look at the graph for a second here, right? What we have here, it says domestic demand and domestic supply. And let's use the example steel, right? Because I believe the U.S. has a tariff on steel from various countries, okay? So, domestic, again, means within our country. So, domestic demand means Americans, right? Americans' willingness and ability to want to buy steel, right? Now, do I buy steel? No, I don't buy steel. Do you buy steel? No, you don't buy steel. So in this case, if we're talking about the steel market, the domestic demand is also producers, right? Producers of cars and bridges and things like that, right? So have that in mind. It's not always just someone buying a burger, okay? That's domestic demand, the willingness and ability to buy steel. Anyone who wants to buy steel in the U.S., only demand coming from Americans in the U.S., U.S. businesses located in the U.S. Supply domestic would be the amount of steel produced in the U.S., right? Who is supplying steel in the U.S.? That's supply domestic, okay? And then I have a bunch of letters in here that we're going to use, And then it says right here, the price of a unit or like a ton of steel would be $50 right now, okay, domestically. So this is the first scenario. The first scenario is this. The U.S. says we will not accept steel from any other country. We are building a wall, whatever, right? And like no one can buy steel from another country. Steel cannot enter in through the U.S. borders at all, right? Well, if that's the case, right, there's no trade allowed, right? What would be the price of steel? It'd be $50. The price of steel would be $50. Why? Because that's where domestic demand equals domestic supply, right? Like if you want to buy steel in the U.S., and this is the producers of steel in the U.S., the equilibrium price will be $50, right? So when there's no trade allowed or total trade restrictions, like total trade barriers are up, and we can't get a foreign supply of steel, right, we're going to have to operate where domestic demand equals domestic supply. So the price in this case would be $50, and the quantity of steel brought to market and sold and purchased, right, would be 100 tons of steel, 100 units of steel, okay? Let's see if we can find consumer surplus if there's no trade allowed, right? Well, consumer surplus is pretty easy. It's the willingness to buy what you actually buy it for, all the way to quantity brought to market and sold, right, and purchased. So quite simply, just A, right? Consumer surplus. It's like if there's consumer surplus and there's no price control, or the price control is not binding, right? It's just left of your demand curve, above the price, all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. Producer surplus if there is no trade allowed, right? Well, here is the domestic supply of steel in the U.S., right? And so some producers are willing to sell steel at this price, but they sell it at this price. Some are willing to sell it at this price, sell it at this price, all the way. So left of your supply curve, all the way to price, all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. So producer surplus would be B, C, and D. So right now, right, consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized. There's no deadweight loss. And economists would say, well, that's an efficient market, right? There is no deadweight loss. Consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized. And in this case, it's shared, right? You could say it's like equal. So the market looks pretty good. However, how come pretty much 95% of economists, I'm just making up a number, but like I never read an economics textbook that in economics was like trade is bad, right? Economists love the idea of trade. So why do economists love trade? If not allowing trade doesn't have any deadweight loss. Well, we're going to see if we allow free trade, we're going to get a influx of supply. All right. So this is before I move on. This is the first scenario here. That's the first scenario. Is no trade. There's your CS. There's your PS. The quantity is going to be 100, and the price is going to be $50. Okay. Let's go to scenario 2. This is scenario 2. Free trade. Right. The other end of the spectrum. We as the U.S. we want to receive steel from wherever. And we want U.S. businesses to be able to buy steel from wherever. We're going to open up our borders and allow free trade, right? Because economists say it works, and we're going to trust them. We're going to see if it works here, okay? So what I said earlier is if there's free trade, that's when this world price is going to come into play here. So it says PW, price world, or sometimes you see it WP, world price. What this suggests is that if you want to buy steel from the rest of the world, it is cheaper than it is in the U.S. So what's going to happen here is U.S. producers or U.S. consumers of steel, but like the producers of cars, right, are going to explore other options. They're going to want to buy steel from other countries because in doing so, steel is cheaper, and that's what gives us our world price of 20. So think about it like this. I don't think I put it on here, but think about we're going to operate at this price because we're going to have more supply from the rest of the world all the way up to this point, right? And you're like, how do you know, right? Well, just go where the world price is. If we're operating at this price, our supply domestic plus international has to intersect our domestic demand curve right here. Is sort of the idea. Now, you don't have to really draw that or label that, but like that's kind of what's going on here. That's what gives us this world price of 20, okay? All right. So here's the situation, right? So we know that the steel is cheaper in the rest of the world, and if things are cheaper in the rest of the world, it's going to cause Americans to want to import, right? No one's going to want to buy our steel. It's more expensive. We're going to import steel. So the question now is this. How much are we going to import? How much are U.S. consumers of steel going to import from other countries? Well, At a price of $20, let's draw a little line going across here. At a price of $20, our domestic supply curve tells us that we're going to have 50 units produced domestically. Right there, QS, quantity supplied domestic. Those U.S. steel producers in the U.S. are going to bring 50 tons of steel to market, okay, at such a low price. A lot of steel producers are not going to be able to produce and sell at such a low price. So what happened is by allowing free trade, a question could be what happens to U.S. Unemployment rate or U.S. employment rate. The U.S. unemployment rate would increase. The U.S. employment rate would decrease. Why? Well, we went from making 100 tons domestically to 50 tons domestically. If we're producing less in this country, it must mean that we're using less labor, so therefore the unemployment rate in the U.S. has increased. So find that world price, draw a line going across. Where does it hit your domestic supply curve here? And that tells us how much is going to be produced by U.S. producers of steel. If world price is above domestic, don't shift anything. Don't shift anything. It's more so going to be like a question, and you're just going to supply the answer, right? If the world price is greater than the domestic price, Americans are going to export steel. And like you're never going to draw anything. This concept on the AP test is not big. Like you don't see it ever, but like you could. So I cover it anyways. I always make sure to cover it. Like it might be a couple multiple choice questions. I think it's been an FRQ maybe once or twice ever. And we're going to do both those FRQs here in a second, but don't worry about that. It's a really good question though. Okay, so continuing on, right? So at a price of $20, we know that 50 units are going to be supplied domestically. Well, how much do Americans want, right? Those American consumers of steel, right? Like Ford, Chevy, and all them. Well, our domestic demand curve is right here, right? And where the price hits our domestic demand curve, it tells us that at such a low price, Americans want to buy 120 tons of steel. If we can get steel at that price, our willingness and ability to buy would be 120 units. That's our quantity demanded. So from there, we should be able to figure out how much we're going to import. So as a country, we're going to produce 50 tons of steel. But as a country, at that price, we are willing to buy 120 units of steel. So 120 minus 50, that's how much we're going to need to import. We're going to produce 50 units domestically. We want 120 units at that price. So we're going to import the difference. We're going to import this quantity, 120 minus 50, 70 units. 70 tons of steel is going to enter through U.S. borders and ultimately be purchased by U.S. consumers. Ford, right? Okay, that's a big deal right there. Now, once we have that, we have a price now, we have quantities now, now we can find economic surplus. So let's first do number 4 here. Number 4 says, what is the producer surplus with free trade? All right. Willingness to sell and what you actually sell for all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. Okay. Well, that's just D here. And we know producers don't like free trade. The producers of steel don't like free trade in the steel market. Why? Because again, right, steel is made more cheaply in the rest of the world. So what happens is U.S. workers are laid off. Some U.S. producers can't even like operate at this price. So willing to sell what we actually sell it for all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. And we're going to stop right there, right? Because we're looking at domestic producer surplus. This is how much is going to be brought to market by domestic producers and how many are going to be bought. Well, Americans are going to buy all 50 of those units, right? But they're going to go elsewhere for the other 70 units. So this is our producer surplus domestically. Willing to sell what we actually sell for all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. This is all that's going to be brought to market and sold is 50 units. So producers are pretty unhappy, right? So obviously if you are a steel worker in the U.S., you're unhappy. And you're going to call a politician and try to get them to fight for you. Ford's pretty happy though, right? Ford's really happy. Why? Well, here's our consumer surplus. Da-dum! Oh my gosh! That's a lot, right? Why is that all of our consumer surplus? Well, here's our willingness to buy. This is the price we actually pay. Left our demand curve all the way to quantity brought to market and sold. We're going to get all that quantity, and we're going to demand all that quantity. We're going to buy all that quantity. We're going to get some quantity brought to market domestically. We're going to get some quantity brought to market foreign, right? But Americans will buy 120 units of steel at this price, and this is our willingness and ability to buy. So consumer surplus, in this case, truly is maximized. Okay, so consumer surplus would be A, B, C, E, F, G, H, I, J. You'd write all those in there if this was an FRQ. So basically, when there's free trade allowed, it really, really helps the consumer of that product. And again, the consumer could be like a consumer like me and you, or it could be a producer that also buys resources, right? In this case, Ford buying steel. And then obviously, the one that makes steel, that raw material, definitely is worse off in the U.S., obviously. Okay, the next question says this, and it's going to be worded like this, so make sure you're paying attention. It says, net gains from trade. Net gains from trade. Gains from trade. In other words, option 1 was no trade. Option 2 is free trade, right? Well, what was our economic surplus without trade? It was here, right? That's how much economic surplus we had if we did not allow trade. Now, our PS plus CS is all of this. So what did we gain? What is the net gain? In this case, it is here. The purple, right? E, F, G, H, I, J. This was not economic surplus. This was not consumer surplus. This was not producer surplus beforehand. And now it is, in this case, consumer surplus. But it is economic surplus now. This was the area of our supply and demand graph that was nothing, right? Because it comes down to quantity. We did not get all this quantity beforehand, and now we're getting that quantity because we're opening up our borders. So the whole point is economists love trade. And the reason they love trade is because economic surplus increases. We gain E, F, G, H, I, J. Now also, make sure you read the questions carefully because sometimes it says, what is the change in economic surplus? You wouldn't say economic surplus is all this. You would say the change is increases by the area of E, F, G, H, I, J. That's how much economic surplus we gain by opening up our borders for free trade. Okay, so economists like it. Consumers of this product like it. Producers do not like it. But entirely, it's better for the economy because we have more surplus. More people are better off, although the steel producer is going to be pretty unhappy, right? But like American business are better off. You and I are going to pay less for our automobiles. It's a good thing, okay? All right, so that's scenario B, all right? The last scenario is this. The steel workers are upset, right? Some steel workers lost their jobs because of this policy of free trade. So, like I said, what generally happens is they find a politician, they contribute to that politician. In order for that politician to get elected, they make their constituents happy, and they say, hey, when I'm in office, I'm going to put a tariff on steel. Or I'm going to put a tariff on steel to help you, right? And then, next time you vote me back in, right, is kind of the general idea. So let's put a tariff on here, right? So you're going to see that I labeled this PT, price with the tariff. That's what PT means, price with a tariff. So the price, including the tariff now, is $25. So how much is the tariff? When a unit, a ton of steel enters into the U.S., how much is it actually going to get taxed by? It's not $25, it's $5 in this case. At least this is what the graph is illustrating, all right? Because the world price of steel is $20, so with a $5 tariff, now when you buy the steel, you're going to pay $25. The government's going to receive that $5 tax, right? And then you, the consumer, is going to pay $25 for it, right? So the producer, the Chinese producer of steel gets $20, right? The government gets $5, and you're going to pay the price. What consumer pays is $25. Very good, Jacob. Very good, my man. Okay. All right. So kind of like we did last time, we have a price now. So draw that line going all the way across. And what we need to figure out now is what's going to be the quantity supplied, what's going to be the quantity demanded, so therefore how much are we going to import, and then after we figure out how much we're going to import, where is our economic surplus at? Analyze the graph. Who's helped, who's hurt, and all that. So there's my line. Price is now $25 for a unit of steel, right, like a ton of steel. And our domestic supply curve is here, right? So at a price of $25, we know that U.S. producers of steel are going to bring 70 tons of steel to market. They're going to produce and bring all 70 of these tons to market. That's our quantity supplied. So you may get questions like this, right? It's going to say, as a result of the tariff, what happens to the U.S. unemployment rate? The U.S. unemployment rate would decrease. And why is that? A little bit of macro knowledge, right? If we're making more stuff, that must mean we're using more laborers. If we're using more workers, we're employing more workers, so therefore the unemployment rate would go down. We went from 50 units to 70 units being produced domestically at this price. The law of supply. When price goes up, it incentivizes more producers to bring more product to market. Profit motive. Okay, well, at a price of $25, how much do Americans want, right? American consumers of steel, 110 units. Law of demand. Price went up from 20 to 25. Quantity demanded went down from 120 to 110. So here's our quantity demanded domestically. Coffee sip. Getting winded. I'm almost there. So how much are we going to import, right? Well, we're going to get 70 brought to market, right? 70 units brought to market. Americans want to buy 110 units at that price, and we can get it at that price because we're allowing free trade a little bit. We're just limiting it, okay? So we're going to import 40 units is the idea. We're going to import 40 units. We want 110. That's our quantity demanded. We're going to get 70 units supplied domestically. So we're going to import 40 units from the rest of the world. Okay? All right, next, where is our consumer surplus and our producer surplus? Which one do I do first here? I do consumer first. So consumer surplus, willing to buy it for, what you actually buy it for, left your demand curve all the way to quantity brought to market and sold, right? Americans are going to get 110 units brought to market, and they're going to buy all 110 units. So that's our quantity. That's where I want you to stop your consumer surplus. Above the price they pay, left your demand curve. So there's our consumer surplus. So consumers of steel are better off in a policy of limiting trade than not allowing trade, right? When they didn't allow trade, they just had an area of A. They limit trade, we still have a little bit more economic surplus is good. However, consumers of steel are hurt by a tariff. If the previous trade policy is free trade, right? Consumer surplus decreased by the area of C, G, H, I, and J. This all used to be consumer surplus, and now the tariff has reduced it. So consumers are a little bit worse off. So, you'll never get a question like this, but what would happen to the unemployment rate of automobile workers in this case? Well, steel producers, steel workers would increase employment. A lot more people would be working for steel plants in the U.S., but that would come at the expense of automobile workers. People working for Ford would get laid off, and that has happened in the last few years. Ford laid off like a huge percent of management and whatnot. My father-in-law worked for Ford for like 25 years, and he recently was laid off, I think last year. So because of the tariff, right? Is kind of the idea. So it helps steel producers, but it hurts the consumers of this product, in this case Ford. Okay? Producer surplus, where's that? Willing to sell it, what you actually sell it for, right? So again, it helps steel producers, right? They're willing to sell what they actually sell it for, all the way to quantity brought to market domestically. We don't care how much is going to be brought to market internationally. What happens to domestic producer surplus? That would just be the area of C and D. So we have some other things to tackle here. There's our producer surplus right there. It says, how much is the tariff revenue? Well, since we just put a tax in this market, government is now involved, right? And government is going to tax steel, a unit of steel, every time it enters into the border. So we need to figure that out on the graph. How much is government going to collect via tax revenue? Well, how many units are going to come over across our borders? We already did the math on that. It's 40 units. 40 units are going to come across our borders, right? 110 minus 70. So 40 units are going to come in, and each unit is going to get taxed at $5. That's the idea. We're going to have 40 tons of steel coming in, and every ton of steel is going to get taxed at $5 a pop. $5 a pop. $5 a pop. So the total tariff revenue would be 5 times 40. So it would be the area right there, HI. That's how you find your government revenue. Your government revenue is H and I. Here's a big tip for the rest of the class. We're going to be, again, learning about tons and tons of graphs, much more than macro, like just things like this. Is it $200? 5 times 40, yeah, $200. Very good. And make sure you guys put in dollars too. Very good, very good. Government revenue in this class will always be a rectangle, or a square, to be more specific, but like generally a rectangle. Government revenue will never be a triangle. Government revenue will never be a trapezoid, right? Ever, ever, ever. So just make sure, just memory aid, okay? Make sure you understand that. And I hope you don't just memorize this right here. I hope that makes sense. We're going to import 40 units, this quantity, and it's going to get taxed at $5 a pop. H&I has to represent government revenue. So what does G and J represent? That's deadweight loss. That's loss of economic efficiency as a result of the tariff. It is loss of economic surplus that once was, and now it does not represent revenue, does not represent consumer surplus, does not represent producer surplus. It is just waste. It is economic surplus that is gone from this market. So, a couple things here. Economists, do they like tariffs? No, right? Because it causes market inefficiency. Market inefficiency exists when there's at any point when there's deadweight loss in this market. Okay? Economists do not like tariffs for that reason being. You might find some that are in support of it. The only reason you'd be in support of a tariff is that it is a means of collecting government revenue, right? It is the cost of living in a modern day economy, right? If you have less taxes elsewhere, this is a way that you can sort of front the bill in another way, right? And also protect some domestic producers. So the U.S. government now is going to have $200 that they can allocate to schools, that they can allocate to roads and infrastructure and bridges or healthcare or military or something like that, right? It is a way for the government to collect revenue. But again, it does cause market inefficiency is the idea. So that is pretty much it, people. That is trade. And every FRQ sort of follows the same steps. No trade, free trade, tariff, can you find CS, can you find PS, can you find tax revenue, how much needs to be imported, questions like that. It's pretty simple. I think that's all I got for you. So, I was going to say questions, but I'll answer questions Google Meet. So let's go ahead, take our 5-minute break. I'll see you guys at 1:42. You have to be in Google Meet up until 2 o'clock. And if I see you're not working on your problem set, I want to make you stay till 2:30, right? Don't be getting out of here without your problem set done. Yeah, I'll see you guys in Google Meet. Go grab a snack, go grab some water, and we'll kind of work through this together. I'll post problem set 2.5. So I will see you in a bit. Drop a like, drop a follow, subscribe to the live stream. Appreciate it. I'll see you guys.